This is Food for Thought with Deborah Walker. This week I have author of a book called Ripening Times. It's a lovely book, a really, really lovely book. And the author's called Ruth Anderson. Welcome, Sherry.
Hi, Debbie. Glad to be with you.
Just give my audience an understanding of what led you to write a book on aging.
Actually, what led me to write it, there's always two levels of answer to a question about a big project. There's the immediate answer, and then there's the deeper, longer term answer. The immediate answer is that one day I was in a yoga class and a beautiful blonde British woman came up to me and said, "I heard that last year you led a trip for elders down the Colorado River and you did some kind of rituals and I need those." And I looked at her and she looked like she was in her 40s. And I said, "How old are you?" And she said, "Well, I'm turning 50 this year, and so I want to have an elders ritual for my friends." Mm-hmm. So I gave her a couple ideas, and we were just standing at the edge of the yoga class, and everybody's rushing in with their sweaty yoga mats. And so she thanked me, and I said, "If you need any help, give me a call." And I gave her my phone number and my email. And I figured that was that. And then a couple weeks later, I got an email from her, and she invited me to visit her on her houseboat. She lives on a houseboat on the Sausalito Bay, right next to San Francisco. And she said she had a raft attached to the back of the houseboat that had a beautiful English garden, and we could sit in her garden and watch the sea otters and sit on the bay and have tea. And she wanted to talk to me more about this matter of growing old. So I thought that was an old-fashioned, lovely idea, and so I agreed. And I went and I met her, and we had lunch. And we talked about this and that and this and that. And then eventually she said to me, "Is there a map for growing old? I need a map for people like me and all my younger clients," she's a coach, "who are looking at me to see what kind of development happens with me." And she said, if there isn't something for those of us who are turning 50 now, all those who are younger, who are looking at us, are going to think that what they have to do is stay like they are, try to be 20 or 30 or 40, and they'll be afraid to grow old. And I want something that lies ahead. So I said, "Well, why are you asking me?" And so I had written a book with my friend Pat Hopkins called The Feminine Face of God about 20 years ago. And she said, you kind of led the way with that book, looking at women's spirituality. And it's not a big deal now, women's spirituality. We all know it's out there and it seems normal to us. But what about growing old? So I said I didn't really know what to tell her and that I'd get back to her. And you know how it is sometimes if you're in a foreign airport and in another language, and then all of a sudden you hear your name on the loudspeaker system and you wake up? Well, that's how her question seemed to me about, is there a map for growing old? And it wouldn't go away. It felt like an assignment with my name on it. And so that really was the immediate cause for my deciding to write a book about what it means to age with grace.
And did you find there was a map for aging gracefully?
Here's what I told her. Eventually, I said, "You know what? There are too many maps. There are maps all over the place. All you have to do is go in a bookstore or Google, and you find people giving you the 7 steps, the 5 ways, the 15 things you absolutely have to do to age with grace. But you know what? That's not what we need now. We don't need to be put in some kind of a box that tells us do this, 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 and this. I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is a compass that can help us find our own way to our own truth as we're aging, to come into the fullness of our time. And so when I told this to the woman, I'll call her Eve, that she said, yeah, exactly, that's what I want. I want a compass. What do you have? And I said, oh, what I have, I know how to let the questions of my own soul come to me, and I know how to follow the questions. And she said, that'll do. Get started. And so that was actually the inspiration for me to write this book. And it's really about how to open to the deep questions that are unfolding for us as we turn 50 and older, 60, 70, 80, and how to let them be true guides for us to living into the depth and truth of our being.
Do you think that in our culture, our society and communities have been eroded away around those natural elders that would have come to the fore and helped guide us?
You know, I used to think that. But I think that was a pretty romantic idea on my part. And as I've done research and read more, I think the real fact is that this is like the deeper reason for why I'm writing the book, or I wrote the book. We're living in a time now that's never existed before in the history of the world. There are more healthy, curious, relatively well-educated, relatively safe people becoming elders than ever existed in the history of the world. In about 20 years, 1 in every 4 people on the planet will be over 60 years old. So we have an opportunity now that never existed before to ask the question, what does it mean to come into the fullness of a deep life, of a life that's really been lived with some kind of consciousness? What does that even look like? It's true in some societies in the past, elders were given a certain kind of respect. But it's also true that there were many places where that was not at all true, because the tribes, the people, were living at a survival level. And if you couldn't make bread, if you couldn't hunt, if you couldn't care for the children, then you were a burden. So it's a mixed history that we have. There were some circles of elders that were powerful and important, but mostly people didn't live past their middle 40s. And if they did, they didn't have the capacity, the strength, the health to be able to truly guide their people. So although there is some history there, it's not as beautiful as we would like to think, certainly as I like to think, before I started to do the research.
That's really interesting, because I did have this perspective that in many respects we almost despise our elderly nowadays, and I feel that it has been the fracturing of our communities that's led partly to that.
I would not disagree with you. I think that we're very frightened about getting old as Western culture goes. That we're very frightened of that. I think in the United States probably more than in Europe. But that doesn't mean that as we get old we have to buy into what I call Mother Culture's web. We don't have to buy into that. And that's part of the power, I think, of beginning a conversation like you and I are having right now, to talk about, is that really true, that getting old is really bad news? You know, honestly, that's why I called the book Ripening Time. Because even the notion, getting old, it sounds like that's a bad thing, and that means that there's not a freshness and a newness and a sense of deepening and discovery that's available. I think I want to say one more thing, if I may, about that. Okay.
Yeah.
So here's a question that I think anybody who's honest has to face, either as you're growing older yourself or as the people around you that you love are growing older. And it's this: how there's a conventional bowing to the idea of wise elders. But the question is, how do you become wise? Or you could say, how does a human being ripen into the fullness of what's possible for them? And does just simply living a lot of years mean that you're going to develop wisdom, compassion, generosity, the qualities of being able to be present and to be all that an elder can truly be? Is it just living a number of years? And if you look around, you know the answer is no. There are a lot of old people who are like wild fruit. You just you just grow kind of bitter and shriveled and self-concerned, and you aren't able, you haven't had the support, you haven't had whatever it takes to be able to truly develop into what a human being can be. So really, that's the deeper question of why I wanted to write this book, to try to understand more, what is it that lets this profound development happen for human beings, and what can we do to support it happening?
It's such an unanswered question. When I got your book, I was absolutely fascinated that you'd written it, because we, in our culture, it is all about turning back the clock, making yourself look younger, dress younger. Your elderly look younger than ever. I've got 60-year-old clients that give my 40-year-old clients a good run for their money, and because they are doing everything they can to turn back the clock. So when I got your book, I found it was absolutely fascinating, the discussion, and it was an unfolding that you were talking about, and a ripening, which I just absolutely loved, and I felt it was something that had not really been addressed.
Oh, I love talking to you. Really, it feels wonderful. How old are you?
Do I want to say on the radio? 44 I am.
Yes, do you want to say that on the radio? And why wouldn't you?
Well, that was what went immediately through my mind. about age. Do you want to give your age out? Because you know full well that there's going to be people immediately talking about it. It's going to go one way or the other. The discussion in the comments box.
But you know what's so wonderful is, so I'll be 71 in a few weeks. And I love that we're talking to each other about this. It feels so honest. And what I want to say is something that it's absolutely true. And people don't talk about it very much. So how do we become wise? How do we truly ripen into the fullness of being human as we age? Basically, it's the hard stuff. Basically, it's the things that happen to everybody that nobody wants to happen. It's the losses and endings, the poignancy, even of the really good stuff, like the people who are your friends and your partners, your spouse, the people that you love, and maybe we have 10 more years if things go well. And so everything becomes more precious, more, you feel a sense of gratitude for it. And even the losses that are so painful and so hard, if you have the support and you've developed enough consciousness, when those losses come, instead of having to close your heart down, you can let it break open. And then you develop a perspective on life that is less self-centered and more generous than perhaps it was when you were younger. Not everybody has the support in this life to be able to let that happen. But if we can speak honestly about how those losses and endings and poignancy that begins to come as you realize, how many more years do I have left? And you feel that capacities that you thought belonged to you, your beauty, your strength, how quick your mind is, how important you may have been in your job, that those start to change. Those start to go. And then who are you? And what really matters? And so T.S. Eliot calls this the gifts reserved for age. And when I first read that, I thought, why would you call something a gift when nobody wants it? But I've begun to understand, as I've been studying this and living it, the gifts reserved for age are the losses and the endings and the poignancy and the sense of who I thought I was and what I thought belonged to me is not who I am. Then there's a transformation. And then who you are becomes so much more transparent and generous and grateful than perhaps you ever were in your life before.
I see a lot of elderly people who are very, very fearful. Do you feel that embracing that perspective actually can remove that fear?
You can't really embrace that perspective, but maybe it can open a curiosity for you. And instead of assuming when a loss happens for you or for your friends, oh my God, that's so terrible. I can't believe that happened to her. You go, you know what? This happens at this time of our lives. How is it for you to be with it? Is it possible? You can't, you can't like embrace a perspective like this, that these are gifts. All you can do is open to the possibility that if you can feel your heartbreak, and if you can feel your sorrow, and you can be right present with it, not shut it down, not run away from it, that something might open that you don't expect at all. A whole other way of being in this life. And as you begin to see that, then you begin to trust it in yourself, and you begin to be able to trust it in other people, and then you actually become like an elder, which is you can help to hold the greater perspective of what it means to be a human being.
Do you think that if we were given the length of our lives, more of us would actually live as Steve Jobs says, which is to follow their heart?
Yes, completely. I'll tell you something. I was thinking about this. I just came back from teaching in Holland, where I work 2 months of the year. I just came back yesterday. And I was thinking about the work that I've been doing there. I've been teaching some large groups of adults about inner development, spiritual development. And I was thinking that I'm too old now to be ambitious about what can happen there. But because that's true, what I feel in my heart is that I just want to be able to be helpful to the process, to contribute to the process in any way that I can, including helping other teachers. And I wasn't generous like this when I was younger, but it makes me happy to be able to feel that generosity, to be able to make a contribution in whatever small way I can. And that's a shift that's just happened. And it hasn't happened because I think it should happen or it would be good to happen. It just surprises me that it's there now.
Is that in effect kind of handing over the mantle, though?
I'm still teaching. I'll probably be teaching for another 10 years. But I'm not seeing that there's something like for me to attain there. So I may be handing over the mantle for someone with a different kind of job. It might be like that. But, you have to wonder, well, what about this generosity of heart? What about what the Bible calls a heart of wisdom? Where does that come from? How does that happen? Is it just you live a certain number of years? Or is there actually a transformative process that's available if you're conscious? And I would add, if you can have a way to talk to other people who are going through this and share it together and support each other. So that's part of why I'm happy to be able to talk to you right now, and think that some of the people who will be listening will be maybe inspired to start groups of their own, or get 2 or 3 friends and decide, let's talk about this. Let's have tea together. Let's have a regular dinner together and talk about some of the hard things and some of the beautiful things that are happening for us now. Because you're not going to find it in mainstream media. You're going to find the infomercials about golfing and buying the right kind of insurance.
Unfortunately. And your care homes.
Yeah, that's right. So these are the really important human questions of what is this life for now?
Yeah. What did you discover?
I think I keep discovering it, but one of the things I discover is that helping to create circles, salons, dinners, lunches, gatherings where questions can be asked, and people listen very deeply to each other is a very profound support for this ripening process. I'm doing a workshop in just outside of Amsterdam in February, where we're going to have probably 60, 100 people come together to be able to look at some of these issues and ask some of these questions and go deeper. It's hard to do it alone. I would say that part of my book has in the back sections about how to create small groups or circles and questions you can ask and how to work with the questions. So you can look at these as an individual, of course, and you can journal about it. But it helps so much if you can ask the question with other people who are interested in being conscious.
Now, I'm not sure if it was meant to be funny, to be honest, but the chapter on the Elders Conference where you nearly had a mutiny from the audience.
Oh, yes, what's that? Yes.
It really did make me laugh because it was basically about the presenters not being old enough. From my perspective, anything after 40 years ago as a child would have been old. And, at what point did they agree? Just enlighten the audience because they probably haven't read this about this. But at what point did they agree that people were old enough to actually present to them?
Tell me a little more what your question is.
Well, I suppose I just want you to enlighten the audience about what happened at the conference, because in effect, part of the audience felt that the presenters weren't actually old enough to actually talk about being
to be asking questions.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So that was a chapter called "Disturbing the Furies," and what happened was when I think I might have been 50 at the time. I was invited with two other women who lived in Canada to offer a conference. And the conference organizer said, as long as the three of you want to do something, and it should be something for women, because that's what she was interested in, I will put on the conference for you. So the three of us were about 50. And we talked about, okay, what's the leading edge for us? What's the place where we're afraid to go, but we think is really an important question for women at this time? And we all ended up with the thing that scared us the most was about getting old. And we all had these very scary images of, what we thought we might become when we got old. So we decided that we would put on something that we called the First Canadian Conference for Women Elders, or maybe for women becoming elders, something like that. And I think it was also the last Canadian conference for women becoming elders. Anyway, so we decided we were going to do that. And what we thought, we had these very gauzy, romantic ideas about what was going to happen at this conference, namely women who were youngish, like us, would raise the deep questions that were coming up for us about getting old and the things that scared us, and we would look into the questions, and hopefully women of all ages would come to this conference, and we could have conversations together. So what happened at the conference was, as there were, I don't remember now, say maybe 200, 300 women there. And we did the introductory part. And then someone stood up in the front row who was actually my friend who was there for free. And she stood up, and she was very short and wide, and she carried a walking stick, a great large walking stick, to help her on the icy sidewalks of Toronto, because it was wintertime. And she thunked her walking stick on the wooden floor. I can still hear it. And she said, "What are you three doing up there?" And she said, "You shouldn't be up there. Where are the white hairs? Where are the gray hairs?" And she turns around now, and she's facing the audience, who she's really talking to in the first place. And she said, "We're down here. We should be up on the stage, and you should be down here." So at that point, this huge murmur goes all through the space. And so I said, "Okay, you have a point. Let's break for tea and bathroom break, and the three of us will talk about it, and then come on back and we'll see what we can do." So, of course, we were scared about this. We knew that this was a problem, but we thought that we would all be asking these questions together. And because we were younger, we had the questions, but that didn't cut it. So what happened was we began to try to work with what was happening in the space. And so when they came back, we said, okay, everyone who considers herself to be an elder, I don't know, at a certain point, you'll come up here and we'll be able to ask you questions. And how about later on this afternoon? And so my friend Joan, who was the one who started all this, said, "No, we'll be tired by then. We need the morning time." So it went on like that. When we finally broke for lunch, we went back to the home of another friend of mine who was also one of the gray hairs. And so we were whining about what was happening and saying, "Well, we didn't really say that we were elders." And she said, "Do you want to know what else is happening?" And we moaned. I said, "What else?" She said, "The fat old ladies like me who are sitting in the back of the room, you are the ones who stole our husbands. Look at what you look like." And we looked around, and I think my friend Michelle and I were not so glamorous looking, but there was a woman with us who was younger, who was about 45. She had long blonde hair, and she was slim, and she wore kind of sexy clothes. And she said, "Look at Raya." She said, "She looks like a movie star." She said, "How do you think that makes us feel?" And she said, "This is the stinky stuff that's been stuffed under the rug for millennia. The young wives who take the husbands away from the old wives." She said, "This is the stuff, the hatred, the fear, the resentment that isn't supposed to be there. It's all here. It's all in the room, and you've got to get it out in the open." So that's what we did. We worked with sounding and shouting and speaking the truth. And it felt like we were riding on huge ocean waves, like 40-foot, 50-foot waves in a tiny sailboat. But the sailboat was big enough to hold 300 women. Some women said it was the most exciting, transformative thing they ever had gone to. Others were scared and upset. And I think as presenters, we were all of the above. And I think that it had to be like that at that time. It's true that we were really too young to be putting a conference like that on. We didn't even truly know the right questions to ask. that would really be of value for the women there. But it was also true that this was part of what was happening. That what you used the word despised earlier, that old people can be despised in our culture because when you're younger, you can fear them. Not you don't fear them, you fear that that's what you'll become. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of the truth that needs to be able to come out and be looked at and worked with. And if we're ever going to get to a point where we're not scared to say, I'm 44 years old on the radio.
More than once. But we do see being old as all those negative words, and as feeble and weak and tired, and also our society does make the elderly feel unproductive. If you're not providing in some way to the overall economy, it is very much that they are treated in a very lesser manner.
Well, so you see, that raises a really important question for the larger culture, which is what has value? We don't expect small children to be productive. Do they have value? Does something only have value because human beings can use it? Does something only have value because it's productive? Or does it have value because it's beautiful? Or does it have value because it has its own inherent life, whatever it is? We tend to see everything this way in the West. I would say more in the States than in Europe, although I think Americans have had a great influence on some of the values around the world. But art, theater, I'm just looking at these redwood trees in my backyard. Do they have value because they're in my backyard? Or do they have their own inherent life, valuable simply because they're alive? We see animals that way. Do animals have their own life, their own value? And so that's such a profound question, not only for individuals as we grow old, but for a civilization. How do you create a wise civilization? How can we transform the civilization that we're living in now, that seems to be about getting and spending and productivity, to one that has wisdom and compassion and generosity, where we care not just about for our own children or grandchildren, but for all the children? It's a huge question in Europe now with the issues of immigration, and who is our country for, and how do we think about ourselves?
Do you think this is an issue then that's much wider, and it's not just about the elderly, it's about how we think about ourselves in general?
Yes, I would agree. The reason I started to, when I was I was a professor of psychology at a very large medical center in Toronto, from the University of Toronto Medical School. And my area of research was schizophrenia and thought disorder. And I published a book and written a lot of research papers. And at a certain point, I started to feel very sad about what felt to me like a split between what felt like us and them. Us being the doctors, the researchers, and them being the patients, the subjects of our research. And I started to long to be engaged in work where there wasn't that split between us and them. And so what was very appealing was to do research about growing old, because I thought we can't pretend that that's not us in a few years. So you could say that the issue of what can we become as we age can be the leading edge of the wedge for thinking about how do you create a civilization that cares for all the people, that sees the value in all the people. And aging is a really good wedge into that, because if we're lucky, it happens to all of us.
I do feel that over the years I've seen less and less care attached to people in general in our society, and that whole generosity of heart has just disappeared. And I do feel it's a whole lack of connection. Interestingly enough, I read a report over the weekend from the RSPCB, which is for the birds, Royal Society for the Birds in this country, for the protection of birds, and that was talking about children who have become incredibly distanced from nature. And I do think that's just evocative of almost everything in many respects. We've become completely distanced from our truth of compassion and connection to each other.
I agree. And then the next question is, how can we change that?
And what's your perspective on that as
I would say what you're doing, Deborah, I would say what you're doing right now is contributing to that change.
That's interesting.
Wouldn't you?
Well, I'd hope so, definitely. I hope that the work that I'm doing is definitely creating a level of ripple effect. Everything I do and put my energy into is very thought through, so that I can contribute on a multitude of levels, so that my energy does go towards longer term change. But I'm not sure that a lot of people do that.
You know, I honestly think people long to do that. I think people long to have a sense of contribution, of making a difference, of feeling that their life has value, and that if there are ways to begin to look at how can that happen, it makes people very happy. Even in the smallest way. You stop to have a cup of coffee in the airport, and the person who serves you smiles at you in a genuine way, and your heart lights up. They've made your day. So and on the other hand, to flip that over, to feel that the work that you're doing makes no difference at all, or that it's just using people, it's discouraging. It makes you sad, whether you see it or not. So I think that people really long to be able to bring a sense of generosity and contribution into life. But how do we do that? And I think a program like you're doing here helps that.
Now, you talk about a story I've read, an elderly lady who brought her photo album in for the nurses who were looking after her in a care home, so that they could actually understand that she wasn't just the elderly person that they were working with. And that is just such a beautiful story, because the the reason for showing that was the fact that she'd had a previous life and she'd had this productive and beautiful life and a really very interesting life. Do you think that that's, we just see our elderly as what they are at the time what's the word I'm looking for? We forget that they've had these lives previously.
I think you're right. It's funny, it's such a little story. It was actually, she didn't bring in the photo album. It was her son and daughter-in-law who brought it in and showed it to all of us, the nurses and doctors who worked in the geriatric ward at that time. And as I think about it now, I realize that as a young person, I really lacked the capacity to know who she was, to think about who could this person who looks so washed out and all so white hair, white skin, skinny legs. I only related to her like that. And part of the problem was that our whole society has a division in terms of generations. I don't know if it's this way in the British Isles, in Europe, as much as it is in the United States. It might be more and more like that. But I didn't, as a girl, have any contact except for rare visits to my grandparents who lived in other cities with people who were a different age than I was. Mm. And so to understand, the continuity of a life, and to begin to make those links and that appreciation, I didn't have that as a young person.
Now, the final thing I want to ask you is, you retell a story, a beautiful story, about a person who learns to play the harp and who has to experience themselves as having no age. And I just thought that was quite profound, actually. So, because how do we live a life without age, do you think?
Well, you don't have to be... Sometimes, so I'm 71. Sometimes I have no age at all. I am sitting here watching the redwood trees in my backyard and the little swallows that are sort of flying in and out of the leaves, and they're bobbing up and down, and I'm no age. I'm just present in the present moment. And other times I'm talking to you about some experience and I have an age. And other times I'm giggling with one of my friends and I might as well be 16. And we don't have to be defined by an age all the time. How boring is that?
Yeah. Because I do think that we do... in our society, we almost, as we hit certain age points, we almost give away part of our life and say, I'm now at this age and therefore I can't live like that. And therefore age starts to define us because of cultural norms.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. We almost give away what we have. So, that's the power, you see, of questions. Mm. What if, instead of assuming that we know, I'm 71 and that means this and this and this and this, or I fell yesterday and that means this and this and this and this, and we start to close in around ourselves, close our world in around ourselves, or we look at somebody else, like I did at that woman Red that we just talked about. In the nursing home, and I assume, she's just this and this and this and this. And what if we let the questions open us up what if we're willing not to know and let ourselves long to know, what does it mean to be right here, right now, completely present with you, wondering what can happen here? Then instead of the doors of the prison house closing on the growing boy or girl, they open. There's no prison house. Everything is open. And so sometimes you feel 71 or 83 or whatever that is, and sometimes you're a person of no age at all. And it can change moment to moment. And if you're free enough, and if you have the support of your friends, of your colleagues, of other people who are willing to ask deep questions, that whole life that happens as we age in years can continue to unfold and grow richer and fuller. And I feel so grateful.
The unfolding is almost like having that constant curiosity about what it now means to be who you are, not the age you are, but actually who you are and what you can experience through that.
Yes. Exactly. Yes, that sigh. Exactly. It's such a relief. Why buy into that identity? Oh, I'm this age. I'm a pensioner. That's what they say, right? Yeah. I'm a pensioner, and that means I'm this and this and this and this. Why?
Yeah.
Why buy that?
I have some amazing elderly people in my life, and one of them is 96 and is the most amazing man I've ever come across. He is like a 70-year-old, if not younger, in how sprightly he is. No one ever thinks he's the age he is, and it's all down to his mindset. He will not allow age isn't just to take over from me. It is just a number to him.
Yeah, so I would say it's all of the above. All of that. and to know that, the time I have left is limited makes everything more precious. I'm so grateful for the way the sunlight looks on the redwood trees right now, for being able to talk to you, for still being able to be with my beloved husband, my friends. And it feels like time gets very rich. I don't want to waste time anymore.
Sherry-Ann, Sherry Ruth, this has been a really fascinating interview for me. It's been one of true learning. I cannot say how grateful I am to have spoken to you. It has been really quite profound for me. How do people get in contact with you to actually go on your workshops and find out more about your book and everything?
Well, my book is published in England and in the United States. It's called Ripening Time, Inside Stories for Aging with Grace. It's an ebook. It's easy to order from, any of the places where you order books. And it's also a softcover paperback. I have a website that's SherryRuthAnderson.com that talks about some of the things I'll be doing. I would love to think that people who hear your show, or maybe if they read my book, Ripening Time, that they would be inspired to create maybe discussions around some of these topics. And in the back of the book, there's suggestions for questions you can ask and how to do that, how to create small circles to do that. But you could just really do it with one or two friends, or you could journal. Some of these questions are very hard questions to look at, and that's why I think it's so powerful if people would consider asking a few friends to look at the deep questions that happen with aging together. And then so much energy is freed, so much laughter can happen. It's really amazing and inspiring. So I would really encourage people to create some kind of circles, or have tea together, or have dinners together, to be able to ask some of the deep questions that come as we grow older.
Ruth, thank you very much for coming on Food for Thought today. This is Deborah Walker, who's 44 and 8 months old, and that was Ruth Anderson, who's 77. Thank you so much.
Bye.